All right then, so today we're joined by Mathew Bareham, who is a bit of a Skoda fanatic, I would say. Hi Matthew, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, yourself.
I'm excellent, thanks. All the better to be speaking with
Good,
you.
good.
So, so what started your passion for retro Skodas? Because compared to sort of like
Oh,
other kind of car brands, it is rather an obscure one. So I am rather interested in that.
it is. I suppose I'm kind of fond of a bit of an underdog. Something you don't see every day, something a bit unusual. I mean, the car that I first learnt to drive in was a Citroen 2CV.
Now you've
Um,
piqued my interest. That's actually my favourite
yeah,
car.
yeah. So, I mean, it's a slightly obscure car to learn to drive in.
Oh,
So I think it
absolutely.
sparked a passion for the slightly unusual.
It must be quite an interesting car to learn to drive in because with the 2CV, you've got a kind of gear shift that came out of
Yeah.
the dashboard. You've got the umbrella stick for the handbrake. Yeah, I guess that was rather odd.
I had to sort of relearn to drive before I took my test in my instructor's car.
Yes, absolutely. So, how did you get behind the wheel of your first Skoda then?
It was kind of I needed to buy a new car. I didn't have a lot of money to buy it with, and I wanted the newest thing I could find. So the first car was a bright blue Skoda Felicia Pacific, which was a little hatchback that I had forever and a day. And it was just for £1,000, I think I brought it for, and it was 4 or 5 years old at that point with very low mileage. And it just went on forever, and I went everywhere in it. And I think it was always sort of cheap, reliable, and kind of, stick with what you know.
Oh, absolutely. And I can remember those Felicias being everywhere back in the day.
They
Um,
were, they were.
But I need to move on really to one of the current cars that you've got, the
Yep.
1986 Skoda Estelle, because I have heard that it is, well, it's been selected to appear in the concours section of the
It
Festival of
had.
the Unexceptional, which of course is where all of the shiny old cars go. So,
Yep.
really, well, the thing about the Skoda Estelle, because of course it's rear-engined, I
It
suppose
is.
it would be quite, again, quite a quirky car. So, how does driving the Skoda Estelle compare to, say, a more modern car or indeed a front-engine car?
It is slightly different, and I think you have to appreciate its rear wheeled nature. Unlike the Volkswagen that I own, it doesn't have anything over the front wheels, so there's no fuel tank at the front. There's no weight at all other than the spare wheel. So obviously everything is over the back axle. Mine is sort of a Stell 2. It's the facelifted version, but it still has the sort of very basic swing arm rear suspension instead of the later sort of trailing arm, which can give obviously massive sort of negative and positive cambers
Yeah,
if
I
you're too
bet.
sort of over exuberant going around the corner. I think you just have to drive it and respect its nature and respect what it is. And it's it doesn't drive like a modern car. It is a car that effectively has its heritage and its design in the 1960s, really. Um, but it's okay. The steering's very light, obviously, because there's no weight over the front, so there's no need for sort of power steering. So compared to sort of an equivalent front engine car that doesn't have power steering, obviously the steering is very light. So
Yeah, I
it
can
can
imagine actually.
feel a bit wandery on a breezy day on a bypass, but once you're kind of aware of its kind of little traits and its quirks, it's fine. You just have to sort of respect its rear engine nature.
And not corner too fast when it's wet, I assume.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just sort of thinking ahead a little bit. If it is a bit of a damp day, drive accordingly. It's not a speed queen anyway. So I just potter around locally, really.
Fair enough. I'm glad to hear that. But I mean, one thing that we have to talk about when it comes to old Skodas is, at least back in kind of like the 70s and 80s, they never really had the best reputation. So,
No.
we'll get into the kind of like details as to why that was in a few minutes. But as someone who's owned so many of them, do you think they really deserve that reputation?
No, I don't. I think it's largely born out of the kind of stigma that maybe driving a car from the sort of Soviet Union and the Cold War and all of those sort of things has. But they're very simple, very well designed cars designed to kind of be rugged, fixed on the driveway. and kept going on a shoestring. And generally, all of mine that I've ever had over the years, touch wood, have never really let me down.
I'm glad
Not
to hear that.
massively. Or never not got me home. The beauty of the Estelle is, it can literally, if you've, I always do carry a little spare toolkit with me just in case. But
Sure, sure.
nine times out of ten, you could probably fix it or do a temporary fix to get you home. And it's just a really simple overhead valve, push rod, chain driven engine. Really, there's not much to it. There's certainly not many electronics to go wrong.
I suppose that was one of the things back in the days of the Cold War, from speaking to people that kind of grew up behind the Iron Curtain. No, if you were to buy
Yeah,
a car, you were pretty much expected not just to drive it, but to also properly maintain it and to fix it when it went wrong. So simplicity,
yeah,
and making sure that a car could run pretty much on a shoestring was so important.
yeah. And I think as well, it was designed to be driven on bad roads in extreme weather conditions, in freezing temperatures. It does have a very good heater. It's designed to be simple and rugged and designed to do a job, to get four people comfortably from point A to point B, which it does well. I mean, you can happily get four adults in it, plenty of room in the front for luggage. There's spare space behind the back seat if there's not enough room in the front. Or as I like to call it, the frunk.
Oh
Um,
yes,
yeah.
like a
So
Tesla.
yeah, it is strangely practical, and it's just a very simple, basic car. And I think when you go, that they had a bad reputation. If you look at what other manufacturers in the sort of the Western world were churning out in sort of 1986, the Skoda is very dated, and very old hat technology and behind the times. And I think that sort of didn't help the reputation. But at the time, they didn't really have the funding from the Soviet government, which owned the company, to be able to invest. There are prototypes in the Skoda Museum, I believe, of a front-engined version of the Estelle to make obviously the car more modern and appeal to more Western buyers.
I actually heard about that. Sorry,
Yeah,
I completely forgot about that because we've talked about the history of the Estelle on this show. We like an underdog as well, I've got to say. And
yeah,
I think the reason that, as you said, because it was owned by the Soviet government, when they actually approached them to ask permission to build a front engine and I believe front wheel drive car, the Soviet
yeah,
government actually rejected because the Russian car industry, of course, led by Lada and Moscovich and that, didn't
yeah.
actually have a front wheel drive car in production in that country, and they didn't want Czechoslovakia to be ahead of them.
No, and obviously when with sort of Soviet history, which itself is quite a fascinating thing. When the wall or the Union began to fall and crumble, that's where sort of things like the Favre in sort of the late 80s came in, which was front wheel drive. A much more modern car designed, with Bertoni and Porsche and Western companies. So it was a big change from what had been, from the Estelle, because I mean largely from sort of 1978 when the Estelle was launched, taking over from the, I think it was the S100,
Sure.
essentially the same car but remodeled, the same running gear, the same engine, just a different shell, but it didn't really change. I mean, the only evolutions were they did a facelift of the front and the back lights. And later there was, obviously it started as the 105, then they added the 120, in the late sort of mid 80s. Just sort of after my car, you had the 130, which was the 1.3 engine. And also there was a variant in sort of Europe mainly, of a 125, which was sort of a 1.2 and a half, which sort of led on to the 130,
That's
which the final with a 5-speed box and things like that to try and it was the last ditch attempt really to sell more of them and try and make them more appealing to sort of Western customers, I think. And mine is a lonely 4-speed, I'm afraid.
oh well. I
You know,
suppose it's also worth mentioning. You say about how interesting the Cold War is, and that's absolutely the case. Do you think that
yeah.
that is one of the main sort of drawing points to people when they actually buy a classic Skoda, or for that matter, say a Lada or a Yugo or anything like that?
No, I think it's more to do with. I mean, I went to a car show on Tuesday evening that's sort of fairly local to me, to where I live, and I can guarantee you, I'm normally the only pre-90s Skoda there. In any show I go to, I think I've only ever been to one show where there was one other Estelle, um, other than Skoda Fest that happens most years.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there is a whole festival for them. Um, but it's nice. I think it's nice to have something different, and I think a lot of people go because of they are now a very quirky, weird relic of the past. They are very easy to fix if you can get the parts, um, and they are something so very different to anything else. I mean, I own a Volkswagen Beetle as well. That's my daily car from 1973. So I've never really owned a
Wow.
modern car. Um, so I can go to a show and be one of 20 Beatles there, but if I take the Estelle, it's always the only one there. But I think uh, it's also I don't know, it's got a charm about it, and I think as much as people hate them, I think now people have realised, the that they've sort of it's kind of gone full circle that they've sort of become cool,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is a bit weird. I mean, I had a guy come up to me and go, "Oh, it's so cool, it's rear engined and da, da, da," and obviously was born after 2000, and then said, "What is it?" So I explained, and I think as well, especially where I live, there is sort of a large. In fact, my neighbour is very fond of my car, coming from Poland. There is a quite a big sort of Eastern European community, so lots of people like to wave and smile. I go to the petrol station, and people are asking about the car. So wherever it goes, it seems to command more attention than I ever thought it would when I restored it. So.
Oh, that's really nice to hear, actually. And if anyone here is listening and thinking, well, you know what, that is a very good. You're making some very good points here. I would actually really like to own an old school Skoda. So, what kind of general advice could you actually give to those people?
What as key things to look for?
Yeah, yeah,
Rust is a
yeah.
big rust.
Oh, okay.
Rust is a big killer of them. They like to rust in all the usual places, mainly around the front wings and the A pillars and the inner wings and quite structural areas. So rust is a big thing. They have a very old-fashioned engine, which is a slightly odd design in the fact that it's an alloy block with a cast iron head. Uh, yeah, which isn't an ideal combination. So head gaskets are a thing. They do like to overheat. Um, if you are too overzealous with them, or somebody's stuck like mine, God knows how much Radwell threw it over the years. There was a lot of it that was flushed out. But I think really, yeah, it's rust and looking at sort of the mechanicals. You know, heads are quite hard to find. Um, Cylinder liners, which I had to replace on my car, very hard to find. Um, so, I was dealing, and it's been very interesting. And I think in the restoration of it, I met some very interesting people. There's a guy who actually made my cylinder liners because at the time, I couldn't find the right ones for that engine. I could find 105s and 130s, but not the ones for the 120, which are a different size. So he makes and manufactures tractor parts,
Oh, wow.
which is another, yeah, which is another branch of Skoda that not many people know about. And he actually machine made the cylinder liners for me at the time because I couldn't buy them. So I've met some very interesting people from all over Eastern Europe trying to find parts. And the actual Skoda Owners Club is brilliant, and a brilliant source of information and parts and people who have loved these cars for years and know everything about them. So, and Skoda's got a very checkered history over 100 years to where they are now. And where they are now is very different to where they were in the 80s. So there is a lot of different genres of cars under one umbrella. So they're a very welcoming club of anything with a sort of Skoda badge on it, really. But yeah, just be really aware of what you might need and start to look, I think, at where you can source them from. There are some great suppliers out there, mainly in sort of West Germany and East Germany and places like that still stock a lot of parts. So, but it's obviously now with us leaving the European Union, they're quite expensive to get in, especially when it's a cast iron cylinder head that weighs a ton.
That's true. Another kind of complication to it.
Yeah.
That's true. But it is nice to see, and that is one of the wonderful things about owning a classic car, isn't it? That you do have a really, really nice community and you get to meet new people, and it's very much so a social thing, I suppose.
It is, and I think the Estelle is quite a magnet for people. If I go to a show, I normally spend a lot of time speaking to people about the car rather than wandering around and doing my own thing, because it always seems to, and I've had the car sort of 4 years now, but it's only sort of been on the road too, and it still absolutely boggles my mind at the amount of attention it gets. I still find people's interest in it it fascinates me.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, and I can completely understand it as well, because it really isn't every day that you see a Skoda Estelle anymore.
No, lots of people point, wave, flash. I have no idea who they are. So if I go to the petrol station, people want to take photos of the car. It's been slightly bizarre.
Absolutely, I can imagine. Well, kind of moving away from the Estelle for a moment, this is a question that I like to kind of finish off every interview with and, talk to, kind of we cover it with every guest on the show. And that is, do you have a dream car that you've yet to own?
Not many. I've owned quite a few over the years.
Sure.
I was thinking about this question. I think I've narrowed it down to three.
Okay.
There's three sort of dream cars to kind of make my sort of odd dream garage. One would be a split screen VW camper to go with my Beetle.
Oh, very nice.
The other would be a rear engine Skoda Rapid to go with the Estelle. So I would have a pair. And I think the dream car that has been since a child is sort of an 80s red or black Porsche 911 with a big 80s whale tail on the back of it. I think that would be the dream car. Probably out of my price range.
That's true.
But I think that would be the dream garage.
It's a very varied garage as well. Actually, I like that because you've kind of got you've got the Volkswagen bus for kind of utility. You've got your Skoda Rapid as a kind of daily driver, and then for the weekends you got the Porsche. I like that.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a bit of bus for holidays, Skoda for driving around every day, and Porsche for high days and holidays.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, well, there we go. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on the show, Mathew, and hopefully I can make it to Festival of the Unexceptional and see this excellent Estelle in the flesh. Yeah,
you're more than welcome. We shall be there. It'll also be at Silverstone for the classic weekend.
Yeah. I've got tickets for that.
Telegraph newspaper. So
it's for the that lesser known cars or the rare car section they had last year.
Yeah, so they're doing sort of the theme is cars that are kind of were once sort of common street furniture that have sort of disappeared off UK roads and aren't rarely seen anymore. So they've got I'm not going to give too much away, but there's a really good lineup of cars that there's a couple that I've never seen or didn't really even know what they were. I had to sort of go and look them up. So it's a real interesting mix.
I can remember last year just standing there marveling at a kind of like 1960s Skoda Octavia and a Citroen GS Palace. It was great.
Yeah, it's quite the collection. I thought it was a bit of a joke when I was approached. I never thought my car, when I restored it in a barn on a farmyard, that it would be on a stand at Silverstone. But hey, there's Skoda ownership for you. You don't know quite what you're going to get.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I'll definitely be seeing you quite soon then.
Hopefully.